Hello, I'm Faith Moore, host of the podcast Storytime for Grown-Ups and author of the novel Christmas Karol. That's Carol with a K. Over on my podcast, we're reading Charles Dickens's novella A Christmas Carol for the month of December. There's a link in the description of this video if you'd like to check that out. My novel, Christmas Karol, is a modern retelling of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, in which the Scrooge character has been reimagined as a workaholic mom named Carol, whose miserliness is not about her money, but her time, and how much time she chooses to spend, or not spend, with her family. To go along with each chapter of Dickens's book, which I'll be reading on my podcast in twice-weekly episodes, I'll be posting a reading of a corresponding section from my own book here on YouTube. In the description of this video, you'll find a link to the book's Amazon page. It's a cozy Christmas read and would make an excellent gift. If you buy a copy, email me a screenshot of your receipt and I'll enter you into a drawing to receive either your money back, making the book free, or an additional signed copy. The email to send that to is in the description of this video as well. And anyone who buys a copy and emails me their receipt is entitled to a free signed book plate, which I would mail to you at no charge. It's a sticker with my signature on it, personalized to you or whoever you're gifting the book to, that you put in the book to turn it into a signed copy. Just let me know in the email who to make the book plate out to and what address to mail it to. In today's episode of Storytime for Grown-Ups, we read Stave 5 of A Christmas Carol, the end of it. So, for today's reading from my book, Christmas Karol, I'll be reading a passage from chapter 22. Carol has finally reunited with her family and is on the verge of seeing her estranged sister for the first time in many years. You really don't think we should have called? I mean, it's Christmas Day. They might have other visitors or just want to be alone or... Carol flipped down the car's visor mirror and looked at her face for no reason. She was absolutely terrified, but she was grinning. The warmth and hilarity of Christmas morning under the tree had filled her up like fuel. She was brimming with it, overflowing, cloaked in gratitude and joy. She hadn't been able to sleep, hadn't wanted to sleep. She had wanted to be exactly where she was, lying there beside Beau in the bed, wrapped in his arms and listening to him breathe. And then, when it could reasonably be considered morning, she had crept away, filled with that feeling, that little kid Christmas morning feeling. She'd tiptoed downstairs to set the hot chocolate simmering on the stove, the coffee brewing in the pot. She'd whipped up a batch of apple cinnamon muffins and thrown them in the oven. And then she'd stood for a while, alone, in the den in front of the tree, looking up at that angel. A perfect angel for my perfect angels. Her eyes welled up, filled with that love. That enormous, insane magnitude of love. And it didn't hurt anymore. It didn't hurt at all. And she had just stood there feeling that, the absence of the pain. And then little footsteps had come pounding down the stairs and the children had come tumbling into the room, exclaiming over the presents and the hot chocolate and the smell of muffins baking and of their mother, most of all, their mother, standing there waiting for them. Her arms held wide. And then the joy had cranked into overdrive and she had just let it all wash over her. Beau's arm around her shoulders on the couch, the children ripping open their presents, everyone drinking the hot chocolate she'd made herself, and Beau's gift to her, a painting of two owls nestled together in a snow-covered tree, the painting he'd been trying to finish on Christmas Eve, a painting for her. Now, in the car, she was filled with all of that, and full, too, of anticipation, of the certainty that whatever was about to happen, she was opening a door that she would never let close again. Beau had convinced her not to call first, to let it be a surprise. They'd all piled into the car in the late afternoon and driven through the gathering dusk, the kids complaining all the way. Beau reached out and took her hand. He pulled it onto his lap and turned in his seat to face her. "Can we get out now, please?" Annabelle said from the back seat. "My face is cold." "Why is my face cold?" Alfie muttered. "Because the car's off and it's cold outside. If we could just Get out? We shouldn't have called, Bo said. This will make her so happy. So much happier than a phone call. Karol nodded, her heart fluttering in her chest, her skin tingling in anticipation. Okay, kids, you can get out, Bo called over his shoulder. Finally, Annabelle yelled. She flung the door open and launched herself out of the car onto the snowy sidewalk. Alfie unclipped his car seat and scooted over, tumbling out beside her. Bo got out too. He jogged around the car and came around to open her door. He held out his hand to her and she took it. My feet are really cold. Is there something wrong with my snow boots? Annabelle said. Oh, there's a hole in them, in the bottom. Look. Whose house is this again? Auntie Fart? Alfie, Annabelle said, forgetting about her boot and dissolving into giggles. It's Auntie Fran. Isn't that what I said? No, you said Auntie Fart. I did? Alfie let out a high-pitched squeal and started laughing so hard he doubled over. The two of them slammed into each other and stood there, propping each other up, giggling and repeating Auntie Fart at intervals. Karol got out of the car. It all looked just the way she remembered it, the way it had looked when she hadn't been here at all. There was the little 2-story cottage, the chimney puffing smoke, the red door and shutters standing out against the dark. There was the snow-covered lawn, the tinseled tree, the little plastic snowman by the door. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, the way it had before, but now she could feel the bite of the cold, the promise of snow in the air. She looked at her children, falling all over each other, and back at her husband. He grinned at her. We'd better get them inside before they fall in the snow. Karol smiled, caught up in her children's hilarity and Bo's infectious smile. Come on, you goofballs, Bo said. Go ring the doorbell. We'll be right behind you. Annabelle straightened up and wiped a mittened hand over her face. Alfie turned and looked up the snowy walkway. Doorbell? I'll ring it. And he took off, Annabelle following along more slowly, tiptoeing through the snow to try and keep the water out of her boots. Karol, Bo said, and she turned. He was looking down at her, his eyes intense and searching. He had on his black knit cap, one curl poking out onto his forehead. The tip of his nose was red with cold. She's going to be happy to see you, I promise. I know. And she did know. She'd seen it. She reached for Bo's hand and weaved her gloved fingers through his. She pulled their entwined hands up to Bo's chest and stepped closer to him. I'm just not sure I should be allowed to be as happy as I feel. Maybe I don't deserve all this. He reached out and tipped her chin up so she was looking at him again. For a minute, he looked like he was trying to find the right words, just the right thing to say, and she waited. But in the end, he just kissed her, drew her chin toward him with his finger and pressed his lips to hers. And she kissed him in the cold as dusk turned to evening and the lights of the house glowed bright against the snow. And she knew, with a certainty that passed all understanding, that whether she deserved it or not, it was hers, to do with what she would. Is that Annabelle? Fran's voice cut through the darkness, a shriek of excitement and confusion. Karol pulled away from Bo and looked up the walk. There was her sister, just as she's seen her before, her long blonde hair whipping over her shoulder in a sheet as she knelt down to scoop Annabelle up into her arms. Karol expected her daughter to protest, to push her aunt away and stand primly waiting for her parents, but she didn't. She wrapped her arms around Fran and leaned into her. She remembers her, Karol whispered. All this time she's been missing her. Bo squeezed her hand but said nothing. Is this Auntie Fart? Alfie's hands flew to his mouth. I mean, Fran? Auntie Fran? Fran pulled back a little, her arms still wrapped around Annabelle, Annabelle's head still leaning on her shoulder. Alfie? Fran squealed. Are you Alfie? Yup, that's me. I'm Alfie. Fran reached for him with her free arm and he flung himself happily into her side, not caring that he'd never seen her before in his life. Fran leaned her cheek against the top of Alfie's head, a kind of odd confusion on her face. Behind her, Joe stepped into the open doorway, cradling the baby against his barrel chest. Fran turned to look at him. "Joe," she said, and Carol could hear the tears in her voice. "Joe, look, it's Annabelle. Annabelle and Alfie, they're just here. Did you come with..." She turned toward the street, trying to figure out where the children had come from, and froze. She had spotted Carol and Beau standing on the sidewalk by the car. Carol's eyes locked onto her sister's, and the years fell away. The stubbornness and the anger and the grief and the hurt crumbled to dust and mingled with the fallen snow. It was Fran, her sister, who had known all along what she wanted and risked everything to make it hers, standing there waiting for Carol to walk back into her life as if she'd never left, as if she'd been holding a place for her all this time. Carol gripped Beau's hand and they moved forward together. Annabelle and Alfie watched them come. Fran stood, a hand on each of their shoulders. Joe waited in the doorway, the baby cradled in his arms. Carol stepped into the circle of light that spilled out of the door onto the snow. The baby wriggled in Joe's arms and began to cry, a wail piercing the gathering dark. "Is that a baby?" Alfie said, turning to stand on tiptoe and craning his head in Joe's direction. "I'm sorry," Carol said. "We should have called." And then Fran was launching herself at Carol, flinging herself into her arms and wrapping her up tight. And Beau was coming forward to shake Joe's hand, and Annabelle and Alfie were peering curiously into the bundle that Joe held down for them to see. And everyone was tumbling into the house, warm from the fire and smelling of wood smoke. And the baby was crying, and the children were arguing over which one of them should sing her a song to get her to stop. And Joe was laughing a deep baritone rumble of a laugh, and Beau was striding over to examine the artwork on the wallpaper, calling out something about scroll work. And Carol, her arm around her sister, found that her eyes were filled with tears. This concludes our readings from Christmas Karol. There's one more Christmas episode of Storytime for Grown-Ups, which will drop on Monday, December 23rd. That will be a wrap-up episode, where we'll discuss the ending of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol and talk a little bit about our book for January. I hope you'll join us. There's a link in the description of this video. And I hope you'll pick up a copy of my book, Christmas Karol. Thank you for reading along with me this December. Merry Christmas.